often on a Monday night with a Marian debate. And this is, of course, pretty much a follow-up to the last debate that we had with Turretinfan, a Reformed Christian, and William Albrecht, a Roman Catholic, where they were debating the Immaculate Conception. And that tied into today's debate, which is going to be, did multiple popes deny the Immaculate Conception? Because that was brought up in the last debate, and we thought it would make for something entertaining on a Monday night. So here we are, again, joined by Turretinfan and William Albrecht. The rules, or the outline for the debate, is going to be 2 10-minute openings. Of course, Turretin's going to be taking the affirmative, William the negative, 2 5-minute rebuttals, 6 6-minute cross-examinations, and 2 7-minute closings. And I'll notify y'all when my little timer here on the phone goes off. And of course, you can also take time if you two want to as well. But we will go ahead and get started. Turretinfan, are you ready for your one 10-minute opening statement?
I'm ready.
All right. Let me get it set here. I'm almost there. All right. Beginning now.
The idea of how many popes does it take to deny the Immaculate Conception might sound like one of those bad light bulb jokes, but it's not a trivial matter. The question of whether or not previous popes denied the Immaculate Conception. Now, to make it clear, I'm not one of those people that goes around and says Pope Francis denies it because of something he said, which is, taken wildly out of context. And I've seen this done where they'll take something wildly out of context, assert it means he denies the Immaculate Conception or denies some other important doctrine, and ignore all the other things he says. And Pope Francis, for example, may have said something that if you took it out of context would sound like he's against it, but when you look and see that he celebrates the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, and you see that he affirms teachings about the Immaculate Conception, you can see that actually in the big picture he affirms the Immaculate Conception, and he does so fairly clearly. So I would discourage anyone who wants to glom onto this discussion we're having today and just start throwing in random out of context quotes into the discussion and say, well, Pope Francis does this, John Paul II said this, which I think is inconsistent with. And maybe you can find some statements like this taken in isolation, but what I want to say is the truth is more important than trying to win this battle. And if it turned out in the end that every one of the 266 men who are listed in the list of popes, if every single one of them had taught the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, then ultimately we just have to accept that and deal with it. And maybe the solution would be we should also agree with it because it's such a long-held doctrine, or maybe the solution would be it just means there was 266 people in a row who held a doctrine that's contrary to what Scripture teaches. Perhaps that's the answer. But we're not going to spend time today discussing whether or not Scripture teaches this. We're going to really focus on whether or not some of the men who are identified as popes, I'm just going to call them popes, even though that's a debate for another topic, whether any of these 266 denied the Immaculate Conception. And again, I'm going to have to divide something up. All of these popes that I'm going to be talking about today come before the dogmatic definition of the dogma. So in other words, these are not popes who said, well, I heard what's been dogmatically defined and I reject that. No, these are going to be popes who came before that time period. In fact, the last pope on the list is someone who died in the 14th century. In fact, the first person on this list is actually not that early. So Pope number 45, Leo the First, through Pope number 198, which is Clement the Sixth, are the popes that I'm focusing in on here. And there's 8 bulleted items here. The first one is Leo the First, also known as Leo the Great. Then Gelasius the First, Gregory the First, also known as Gregory the Great, John the Fourth, and that's one where we know that it's by Roman clergy and it's attributed to John the Fourth. Innocent the Third, Innocent the Fifth, John the 22nd, and Clement the Sixth. Now, those last 4 come after the development of the doctrine. So, as I have asserted in previous discussions, this doctrine is not an ancient and apostolic doctrine. It's not a doctrine that was known in the early period. So Leo the First would never have heard of someone who explicitly affirmed the Immaculate Conception on those terms. He would have run into people who denied it, such as anyone who denied the doctrine of original sin altogether would necessarily have also said that Mary wasn't conceived with original sin. But he wouldn't have known of someone who said everyone else, except for Jesus and Mary, had original sin. So there wasn't this doctrine didn't exist, in my understanding, during this period. So when I say that they contradicted it or spoke against it or disagreed with it, I'm not saying that they were explicitly aware of it, just that their teachings are inconsistent with it, fundamentally inconsistent. So that's the first group of four. The second group of four come from the 13th and 14th centuries, and there we can talk about them explicitly disagreeing with it. And so you'll see, if we look at the specific statements, some of those statements will be much more directly to the point. So taking an example of a quotation from Leo I, we see in his fifth sermon on the Nativity, that's Sermon 25, in chapter 5, it says, "When by the condition of birth there is one cause of perishing for all, and so among the sons of men, the Lord Jesus alone was born innocent, since he alone was conceived without the pollution of carnal concupiscence." This is a rationale that Leo gives for why Jesus was immaculately conceived. Jesus alone was immaculately conceived, meaning there's no implying that there's no immaculate conception of Mary. And yes, I acknowledge he says here sons of men, and Mary is definitely not a son of man, but his logic would apply to Mary. And so he says in another place, so this is the second sermon on the Nativity, it's Sermon 22, he says, "And to this end, without male seed, Christ was conceived of a virgin, who was fecundated not by human intercourse, but by the Holy Spirit. And whereas on all mothers, conception does not take place without stain of sin, this one received purification from the source of her conception." So what Leo is saying here is that Jesus' conception is absolutely unique, and he hasn't forgotten about Mary. This is not like he just happens to not be thinking about Mary. He's actually discussing her in the same context, but not making her an exception. He's saying that Jesus is the only exception. And so this undermines and contradicts the doctrine. If you accept what Leo's saying, Leo doesn't believe in the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, and what he teaches is against it. We see Galatius, his comments, he says, accordingly, whatever, this is in his fifth letter, sometimes identified instead as his seventh letter, but regardless of the numbering, according to whatever those parents produced of their stock is indeed the work of God according to the institution of nature, but not without the contagion of that evil which they derived through their own transgression. So, in other words, Galatius is essentially adopting the same fundamental position that all of the people who are generated through the normal way that people are generated through a mother and a father, those people are contaminated by original sin. Gregory I, in his book of Morals on exposition of Job, also says, "For we, though we're made holy, yet are not born holy, because by the mere constitution of a corruptible nature we are tied and bound, that we should say with the prophet, Behold, I was shapen in wickedness, and in sin hath my mother conceived me. But he only is truly born holy, who, in order that he might get the better of that same constitution of a corruptible nature, was not conceived by the combining of carnal conjunction." So again, we see this patristic view that anyone who's conceived the normal way through a mother and a father has original sin, and therefore that's Gregory the First's proof that everyone has it except for Jesus Christ. The amazing thing is there's so much evidence that time's limited, but let's muster on John IV, as quoted in Bede's Ecclesiastical History, says that in the first place it's blasphemous folly to say that man is without sin, which none can be, but only the one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus, who was conceived and born without sin. For all other men, being born in original sin, are known to bear the mark of Adam's transgression. So that's from John IV before he became Pope. And I would point out that I haven't gone through in each case and confirmed that the statements were made while the person was the Pope. In some of these men, I may have talked about them as the Bishop of Rome, but in some cases, these are the last two, for example, John the 22nd and Clement the Six are actually Avignon popes. So they were actually the Bishop of Rome, but serving in Avignon at that time. Moving on to Innocent III, his sermon on the purification of the Virgin. There he says that he cleansed her soul from original sin, which, again, the only way for him to cleanse her of the sin is for her to have the sin in the first place. Innocent V, in his commentary on Peter Lombard's sentences, has quite a long discussion, but in that he ends up concluding that it was not suitable for the Virgin to be conceived without original sin. John the 22nd says that she, referring to the Virgin, passed first from a state of original sin, second from a state of childhood to maternal honor, and third from misery to glory.
We got 10 minutes right there.
All right.
You can finish the sentence, though.
Actually, that was the end of the.
Oh, that was okay. All right, good deal. All right, William, are you ready for your 10-minute opening statement?
I sure am. I will begin now. Thank you.
Go.
Okay. Well, when the great Pius IX hearkened to Blessed Duns Scotus, theological powerhouse of a mind, in the very essence of calling God ineffable, he must have had the minds of several popes of the past on his mind when he said, "All are aware with how much diligence this doctrine of the Immaculate Conception of the Mother of God has been handed down, proposed and defended by the most outstanding religious orders, by the more celebrated theological academies, and by very eminent doctors in the sciences of theology." He must have thought of such giants as Leo the Great, Gregory the Great, Pope Gelasius, and several others. We're told by my good friend and esteemed opponent, Turretinfan, that multiple popes denied the essence of the Immaculate Conception. And quite a few have been included in this list that we're told that they either directly said Mary had original sin or committed actual acts of sin. This whole argument must finally be dealt with in depth. And I'm glad my friend Turretinfan and myself have decided to debate this issue because as the great Leo the Great sat penning his masterful and impeccable tome, he called to mind these very nativity sermons that we read of today. And he also called to mind the wonderful love and devotion to our blessed and immaculate mother that he had. Leo beautifully weaved together for us some of the most incredible imagery of our blessed mother. He said Christ was born from a pure virgin, a royal virgin of the stem of David, was chosen to carry the sacred seed, he said. Christ was born from the body of his untarnished mother, unsullied mother. Christ is born from the body of his pure mother. And lest we forget the amazingly masterful tome that Leo left us, where we are told that Mary had no guilt. No guilt. Mary, the flesh that Christ assumed from Mary, was not a flesh that was tarnished with original sin. Excuse me. Lest we forget also the great Pope Gelasius. We travel a little bit forwards in history. Hearing Gelasius perhaps recount a little bit about Mary. Of course, we don't argue that Gelasius talks about the actual Immaculate Conception of Mary, but we do realize when Gelasius actually does talk about Mary, when he actually does speak of Mary, he actually says things like this: "Deliver us, O Lord, from all evils, past, present, and future, and grant us the intercession of the blessed and glorious ever-Virgin Mother Mary, and of the apostles Peter and Paul." The love Gelasius had for our Blessed Mother was clear in his extant works, which really, there's not a whole lot there. And what does exist there, Gelasius does not talk a whole lot about Mary, unfortunately. But we do travel a little forward to the time of the great Gregory the Great, and a monument to the man, a real pillar of the papacy established by Christ. Gregory had an unfailing love for our Blessed Mother. And in his writings, he was clear to separate Mary from the greatest of the saints. He had different classes of saintliness, and for him, Mary was separate from all the others, which is why he says, and this mountain has been made the highest mountain, because Mary's height has shined out above all the saints. Christ, he tells us, raised her above all the angels. Perhaps in his most memorable words on Mary, Gregory says, so Isaiah, and the fruit of the earth shall be exalted, Isaiah 4:2. For him whom the virgin bore was not only a holy man, but also the mighty God. Elizabeth referred to the fruit which she greets the virgin and says, blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. Mary is rightly called Mountain of Ephraim because while she is raised up by the ineffable dignity of the divine birth, the dry branches of the human condition flower again in the fruit of her womb. If there is one constant thing in the writings of these popes, it is not a denial of Mary being immaculate or statements of Mary containing original sin. Remember, this is my opening statement. I'm not going to rebut what Turretinfan said yet until my rebuttal period. So the one thing that we see is a constant thing is there is not a denial of Mary being immaculate or her containing original sin, these popes. But it is the incredible, consistent devotion and love these popes had for our Blessed Mother. We will see in today's debate that it will take an incredible amount of misrepresentation to twist the true words of these pillars of the faith. And no words, could better describe Mary than those of Pope John IV, who for him, Mary was intimorata. For him, Mary was spotless, pure, immaculate. In the very works being quoted today, in the very context, the great John IV tells us, the Lord took true flesh from an undefiled, an immaculate and blessed virgin, God-bearer. All of these popes spoke as the mouthpiece of the great Peter, our saint and rock, that Christ gave the keys to the kingdom of heaven to. An apostolic mouthpiece, if you will, in line with Pope Innocent III's quote-unquote conception of the Blessed Mary is to be celebrated by apostolic mandate. The great Innocent III was sure to make sure that the feast of our Immaculate Mother was instituted in the ancient Decreta Gallicana. Lest you think the legacy of the popes by the name of Innocent, having a great love for our Immaculate Mother, would have ended with Innocent III, we travel to the 1200s and pilfer the archives of the magnificent pillar Innocent V, who mused, I think that a more copious grace of sanctification descended on her, not only to sanctify her birth, but thereafter to guard her clean from every sin. Therefore, God forbid that this house would have anything tarnishing it, that the brush of Lazarus would be sought in it. Just as the psalmist says, the house of God is holy. Therefore, there is a special holiness to this house, to this special house. The Blessed Virgin was the house of God in two ways. First, in regard to the spiritual indwelling in mind, and in regard to the bodily indwelling in the flesh. Indeed, whereas there is little known of the papacies of John the 22nd and Clement the Six, we can read a little bit more. We can read and we can see quotes here and there, even though there's real short stuff. If we look into the archives of the Patrologia Latina, there's not a whole lot there of some of these popes. Some we rely on secondhand sources. Some we rely on decrees they've left us. But is there enough there to give credence to the original claim that up to, I don't know, half a dozen or maybe 7 or maybe 8 popes denied the Immaculate Conception of Mary, or denied what would have become logical to accept the teaching of the Immaculate Conception? You see, if we show only one exception in each of these popes, if we show that Mary was shown as an exception in these popes, then the argument falls apart immediately. Because even if a pope says X, Y, and Z must have original sin, or the whole of the world has original sin, and then he shows that he believed Mary to have been an exception, then that shows Mary was an exception in the mind of that pope. And that is the argument that I put forth today. I put forth the argument that these quotes, which were originally brought forth by a Jansenist, by the way, by the name of Launoy, he put forth these arguments. By the way, he was not a very good theologian. He brought forth these arguments. These arguments were then later translated into English, I believe, and these arguments have been snatched up ever since Launoy presented them. Launoy's theology was wretched. It was terrible. I argue that none of these popes that he puts forth deny the Immaculate Conception. And I argue that not only was Launoy dishonest in his presentation, but I think he was very selective, because Launoy would have known very well the teachings of Leo, the teachings of Gregory, Gelasius, and so many other popes. But what you find here is quote mining, grabbing little quotes here and there, little pieces here and there, and running with them, and really reading into them, reading way too much into them, because we will see that these popes viewed Mary as an exception as an exception of the whole world having had original sin. She was viewed as an exception. We will see more of that in just a bit. I've got about 8 seconds left in my opening statement, and I will surrender the rest of my time to hear Turretinfan's rebuttal.
Okay, Turretinfan, you have 5-minute rebuttal beginning now when you're ready. You there?
Thanks. It helps if I unmute myself. So thanks. Sorry about that.
All right.
And so there is not a lot for me to rebut in that presentation, because you will notice that none of the quotations that were provided from any of the popes actually affirm the Immaculate Conception, which is not surprising because, as I said, all of these popes did deny it. However, let me address one of those quotations first, because I think on a rhetorical and perhaps on an emotional level, it's the strongest one, which was one which alleged that, I think it was John IV, had said that Mary was a spotless, pure, immaculate virgin, or something to that effect. And the word immaculate was used there, right next to the word virgin. There are also going to be other quotations from other of the popes on this list. And many of these quotations may, in fact, use the term immaculate with respect to Mary. But keep in mind that she, as an immaculate virgin, just means that she wasn't just technically a virgin. It literally means she really was a virgin. Then, that's what it's getting at. It's not it actually doesn't say anything further about her, but there are other places where she's talked about as being completely free from sin and holy, and there are very high praises given to her, especially by the later popes, especially by Innocent III, Innocent V, and so on. So it is true that especially folks like Innocent V would have believed, or did believe, that she was purified in the womb, and therefore when she was born, she was already free from sin. But that isn't the doctrine. The doctrine is not just that she was innocent at birth and free from sin throughout her life. The doctrine is that she was conceived without the stain of original sin, something that all of these popes rejected either explicitly or implicitly. Remember that the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception is a doctrine about an event, not a state of being. It's not saying that Mary didn't have original sin or the guilt thereof later in life or even at birth. It says that from conception itself, she was preserved from original sin, not that she had original sin and it was cleansed. So her being pure, her being holy, even from birth onward, even those later popes that do affirm that kind of thing, those popes are not affirming the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, and that would be misleading to assert they were based on that kind of statement. So untarnished mother, pure mother, or something like that from Leo I is not an affirmation of the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. We were told that it's important not to deal with quote mining, and I agree that it's important not to deal with quote mining. On the other hand, I think that's easily resolved in a debate like this by presenting the necessary context that shows that something has been misunderstood. So my esteemed, opponent in this debate has the opportunity to present places where any of these popes actually affirmed it. He said if they see Mary as an exception, then we'll see that these statements don't apply. And on that theoretical level, I agree. If he presented something that says, Leo says, Mary was also preserved from the corruption of original sin, because her birth was also not from an ordinary mother and father like Jesus, that would make sense with his argument that he's presented. And it would also demonstrate that although it sounded like he was against the Immaculate Conception, he really wasn't, because he also thought that Mary was specially conceived in a way that was different from everybody else. But I don't think we'll find that. But of course, if we do, I'd be happy to revise my position and adjust the number of popes that fall on the other side of the line, or if every one of them just actually affirmed the doctrine of Immaculate Conception, then I'll deal with that, when the evidence comes and supports that position. But I don't think we'll find that. I think we might find things about Mary being especially holy, Mary being higher than all the rest of creation, or higher than the angels, and all of these very nice things about her, but nothing that says that she was conceived in some other way than by her mother and father, bringing her about through normal intercourse. And under the logic provided by Leo and Gregory, that means she had original sin. Whether she was subsequently cleansed of it, or whether she wasn't subsequently cleansed of it, is an entirely different question. And with that, I turn the time back over.
All right, let me restart the clock here. William, are you ready for your 5 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
All right, start your rebuttal beginning now.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Turretinfan. All right, let us go right on to the Tome of Leo. And I'm going to read a little bit of what my friend Father Coppus has written on this issue, and I'm going to read a little bit of his translations here. In regards to the Tome of Leo, in his book, in his article on Pope Leo, he says, "At this point, I introduce the important figure of Pope Leo I. Leo was committed to the idea of human flesh being encumbered by the culpa, by the guilt, liability, the fault of Adam. Incontestably, once reading Leo's teaching on original sin, we read this. When speaking of Christ's assumption of flesh, assumption of Mary's human flesh, he writes, all this, the devil causing humans to lose the gifts of God and to die, called for the realization of a secret plan whereby the unalterable God, whose will is indistinguishable from his goodness, might bring the original realization of his kindness towards us to completion by means of a more hidden mystery, and whereby humanity, which had been led into guilt and culpum by the craftiness of the devil, might not perish, contrary to the purpose of God." Then we read a little further. There's a whole lot to read, but we read a little further that nature was taken from the mother of the Lord, not guilt, non culpa. We read a whole lot more. We also read this, which is quite interesting. Born by a new mode of birth, because inviolate virginity, while ignorant of concupiscence, supplied the matter of his flesh. I would say it's pretty clear Leo viewed Mary as an exception. I think it's really tough to argue from that point of view when we read the Tome of Leo. What about Pope Gregory? I pointed out the reason why my opening statement, I don't ever use my opening statement to be a rebuttal towards my opponent. I respect my opponent. So I let him lay his case out. Then I lay my case out for the positive aspects of what these popes said. I show they had another aspect of Mary, an aspect that shows she was an exception. That is why Gregory showed a different class of saints. He said all saints are born in original sin, but he shows Mary as part of a different class. He calls her the highest mountain ever created. He never says she was conceived in sin, ever. What about Gelasius? He uses Anesius Peccati in the Latin. Only he who does not know sin is by nature sinless. Which being restored after sin, he took up by his powerful kindness to impute indebted death, which was not ought in any way without sin, on behalf of those who through sin had stood out as debtors belonging to death. Mary is not sinless by nature, but by grace. There is no infection that is being battled here, no defect but death. Context is important. He came to battle death. There are many other passions and effects of original sin. The point made here in the context is that Christ alone is he who in his nature was sinless. The modality which this happens is suggested by his taking up of flesh of mortal nature. Mary's not even mentioned here. I read what Galatia says when he very rarely brings Mary up, because he hardly talks about Mary in the actual works of his that really exist, that are his, not just a work that is simply attributed to him. Not just a work. And there's much more to be said. Pope Innocent III, Pope Benedict the 12th, John the 22nd. We're told Pope John IV said that, well, you know what? That just means that she was a virgin. No, it doesn't. Look up that Latin word. Look up what Cardinal Henry Newman said about that title for Mary. John used that in just a few sections later, after supposedly denying the Immaculate Conception. He says Christ's flesh was from an immaculate virgin, an immaculate and blessed virgin, God-bearer. It's tough to work your way around that. There's so much more said. I don't even have enough time to go through everything. Pope Clement the Six, Innocent V. I'll read Innocent V right away. Wasn't able to get to that before my time runs out. He says, I think that a more copious grace of sanctification descended on her to sanctify her birth and guard her clean from every sin. My rebuttal period time is up.
All right, and now let's see. We have six-minute cross-examinations. I think William, you go first. Is that not right?
No, I think Turretinfan goes first.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, Turretin, you have your 6 minutes beginning now.
Thanks. If I heard you correctly, the last quotation you were providing was one from Innocent V. Is that correct? The one
that is correct.
Okay. And if I heard you correctly, you said you said a more copious grace descended upon her to cleanse her. Is that accurate?
No, let me pull that up. Give me 1 second. I said, okay. I think that a more copious grace of sanctification descended on her, not only to sanctify her birth, but thereafter to guard her clean from every sin. Therefore, God forbid that this house would have anything tarnishing it, that the brush of Lazarus would be sought in it.
Okay. So to sanctify her, what does innocent mean by sanctify there?
That's an excellent question. And I think the important thing that we need to read, well, you're talking about Innocent V, right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. First off, let me let the audience know. What we're talking about here is a commentary on Lombard Sentences, Book 3, Distinction 3. But what I am actually quoting is the distinction right before and right after. What Innocent is doing here is he's setting up a bunch of different kind of hypothetical scenarios, saying, well, what if this would have happened? What if this would have happened at this period of time? And then he says what he thinks would have been more logical. At one point in time, he says, in the first sanctification, to prepare the indwelling of the Spirit for the Holy of Holies, she was totally sanctified in the Spirit. So he says his clincher is this. His clincher is that he believes Mary's cleansing was exactly as that explained by John of Damascus. So we know John of Damascus believed in the Immaculate Conception in his homily 1. He then goes on further to continue talking about what he means. He says, Mary would have been completely sanctified of sin at the very moment that she could have been. So we've got a ton of questions and answers being tossed at us. And then later on in these hypotheticals, he begins to answer which one he deems to be the most logical one. And the most logical one for him would have been that Mary would have been preserved from the very beginning of her existence.
Okay, so when he says sanctified, does he mean that she has her sin removed?
No, he never says that at all. In fact, remember, look at what he says right after that. It says, it doesn't say to clean her. It says right here, it says to guard her clean from every sin. And then it says, so that there'll be no tarnishing in this house of God. So remember, Turretinfan, before we get to this particular question, he's setting up a bunch of different hypotheticals. And if you notice, even in the one that is translated in English, it sounds a bit confusing as he's going back and forth saying, well, it could have been this, it could have been that. Some doctors taught this, some doctors taught that. But his conclusion is one that is very in line with the teaching of the faith. And the clincher for me is when he says, just like Damascene says, the Holy Spirit was cleansing Mary. That's the kind of cleansing that is being talked about.
Would you agree with me that the doctrine of Immaculate Conception, the dogma that's now defined, teaches that Mary did not contract original sin?
That is correct.
Now, Innocent V, in addressing these various possibilities, I think you would describe them as hypotheticals.
That's correct.
He's addressing the second one. He says, in the second degree was not suitable to the Virgin because either she would not have contracted original sin and so would not have needed the universal sanctification and redemption of Christ, or if she had contracted it, grace and fault could not have been in her at once. So looking at the first part of that, the part where she would not have contracted original sin, do you agree that this sentence by Innocent is saying that the second degree is not suitable because it implies she doesn't contract original sin?
I agree that if we were to stop there, it would seem like he's saying Mary had original sin, but Innocent says a whole lot more than that. Remember what Innocent also says, which is it's quite odd that even the way it's written in the Latin, I'm no expert in Latin, but notice where he says the third condition, the third degree actually, is peculiar to the Holy of Holies, right? So we know the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies, let me just get confirmation from you. We can both agree he's talking about Christ there, right?
Are we still talking about the same passage?
Yes, it's the same one. It's the exact one that is on the page. So look at what he says there. He says the third one, the third condition is peculiar to Christ. So to me, I found that very odd that he begins going through all these things. Sounds like he's imputing original sin to Mary. But then we get to the very end, and he then says that the third one seems to be the most suitable and piously believable. But didn't he just say before?
It's 6 minutes, William. All right, now, William. No, you're good. William, you have 6 minutes now to cross-examine Turretinfan.
Could you give me maybe about a 15-second break so I can blow my nose and get
Yeah. Okay, not a problem. Not a problem. Yep. All right, let me reset my timer here anyway. Give me a good chance to go ahead and do so. All right. Y'all can go ahead also and start sending questions. If y'all want to start posting live questions in the chat, I'll start looking for them, and we can ask those after the debate. All right, so William, you have 6 minutes beginning now.
Awesome. All right, Turretinfan, I want to hop on over to Pope Leo. We can hop on over to Innocent later. What exactly does Pope Leo mean if we look at his tome, where he says that inviolate virginity was ignorant of concupiscence and supplied the matter of the flesh to our Lord? What would Pope Leo mean by saying that?
He means what the scriptures delicately put as she knew no man.
Okay, so when we read that when Christ took his nature from the mother of the Lord and that had no guilt, non culpa. What exactly would that mean? Would that mean that he simply took his nature from the mother, and she did have guilt, and he avoided that guilt? What exactly does that mean in Leo's tome?
What that means in Leo's tome is that Christ did not have any sin absolutely whatsoever. He didn't have a corruption of his nature. Although he had a true human nature, he didn't have a fallen human nature.
Yes, but it says that nature was taken from the mother, and it says non culpa in terms of there was no guilt that was taken. What does that mean? We know that Christ had no original sin. What in particular does that mean, that particular portion?
I mean, I think that what I've just said pretty well summarizes what that means, which is that he obtained a human nature from his mother, but he did not obtain original sin from her.
Okay.
And he explains why, which is he didn't have a human dad.
Okay. When we look at Pope John IV, just a few sentences after the supposedly dreadful lines denying the Immaculate Conception, I want to focus on what John IV says about Mary. He uses a title for Mary that we have such scholars as Father Kentenich and Cardinal Henry Newman have pointed out that Intimorata means spotless, pure, impeccable. They've pointed out to this being an early ancient title for Mary, used in the early church. What are your thoughts when John says, "For indeed the Lord took up true flesh from an undefiled or an immaculate and blessed virgin, God-bearer"?
It sounds like what the person is saying is that the person, from your description of those words, it sounds as though we're talking about him describing someone as not having sin.
Okay. I want to hop on over. I mean, I know we're going so fast, but I mean, we've still got a few more cross-examinations. There's a quote that's really interested me, captivated me for quite some time. Pope John the 22nd or Benedict the 12th. Can we hop on over to that? Can you read that quote for us?
Yes. She, referring to the Virgin, passed first from a state of original sin, second, from a state of childhood to maternal honor, third, from misery to glory.
Who wrote this? Was it Pope John the 22nd or Benedict the 12th? I mean, Pope John the 22nd or Benedict the 12th, yeah.
Pope John the 22nd.
Okay, it wasn't Benedict the 12th then.
No, it's sometimes attributed to him, and but I think it's the scholarship seems to be on the side of John the 22nd.
Can you read the full paragraph for us? Shortly before where it says firstly and after where it says from the state of misery?
My Latin is not excellent, and this is, it was originally written in Latin, and that would be the only language I could give it to you in. But if you bear with me, I'm happy to try to stumble through it.
Yeah, if you could read right before where it says the very beginning where it says that she passed, the whole thing. If you could read the whole context for us.
Okay. 1 second, let me.
Not the actual Latin of that particular verse, but the context surrounding it before he gets to that portion.
Yes, I think I understand what you're saying. So you want the whole paragraph and the
Yeah, if you can read the whole context first.
Yeah, I apologize. My it's written in a. You're not expecting me to do a live translation of this, I hope.
I'm not expecting you, but if you could read the context, I think the context would be very helpful. I did go through the trouble of getting translations of every single one of these works from Latin into English because I don't know Latin. So I would hope for you to be able to read that context. And the only reason I'm haggling with you with it on this is because everywhere that I've looked, from individuals that are scholars, and not only John the 22nd, but Benedict the 12th, have listed this as not only a fallacious but a spurious quote. So I'm really curious what the context is in the edition you have.
Wow. All right. Okay, so this is from the sermon.
Yes, I understand the title of it.
Well, that's the first words on the line are that it's a sermon on the Assumption of the Blessed, Blessed Virgin.
Are you aware it doesn't exist in any of the Pope's codices? This doesn't exist in any of these, either Pope John the 22nd or Benedict the 12th.
There's a good reason I'm not aware of that, because it does exist.
Yeah. All right, we are at 6 minutes right now. Let me go ahead and restart the timer here, y'all. Turretinfan, you have 6 minutes to cross-examine William, beginning our second round, starting now.
Okay. Let's look at Gregory the Great. I believe you had mentioned that Gregory says there's another class of saints.
Correct.
And do you recall the source for that?
Yes, that would be in the Patrologia Latina 79, translated by Gambaro as well. And actually, I didn't say he had well, let me actually qualify that. He doesn't have like another class of different groups of saints. He has a class with Mary alone above the other saints. So he says that Mary's height shines above all the other saints. So, I mean, there's a ton more that he says, but the reason I bring this up is because in some of the quotes that you quote of Gregory, we read of even the greatest of saints being born with sin. John says no one is without sin and what have you, but Gregory himself includes Mary as the greatest mountain ever created. His language, when he actually does talk about Mary, is very, very elevated.
Okay. By Gambaro, you're referring to Luigi Gambaro?
That's correct.
He wrote a book called Mary and the Fathers of the Church, correct?
That's correct. But you don't have to go there. You can go to the Patrologia Latina. It's there. I confirmed all of these quotes before I used them.
In that book on Mary and the Fathers of the Church, is there a section on the fathers who taught on the Immaculate Conception?
It's irrelevant. We're talking about these popes, not the fathers.
Right, but you would consider Leo and Gregory fathers of the Church, I hope.
Definitely.
So, does Luigi Gambaro, this great scholar in this field, when he talks about people who taught the Immaculate Conception, does he point to them?
Does he point to Leo or Gregory? I'm not aware if he does. I really don't know. I don't have that book in front of me.
He does not.
I don't know either which way. I don't think it really matters, but I don't know if he does. I don't think. Let me qualify something. Hold on. I'm not arguing that Gregory the Great teaches the Immaculate Conception. I do argue Leo does, but Gregory the Great, I don't think he does. My argument for Gregory the Great is that when he does talk about Mary, he shows she's in a class of her own. He doesn't include her in the arguments that he's making in these other certain passages. In the relevant quotes of Mary, he speaks very differently of her. So I don't know if Luigi would say he believed in the Immaculate Conception. I myself have found nothing compelling that shows that he did, but Leo did. There's no doubt that Leo definitely did.
So when you say there's no doubt, I mean, that's great. So which would be the passage that of Leo for which we could most clearly see this?
Yeah, I wish my Latin was very good, but since it's not very good, I was able to consult with a few individuals that are probably the top Latinists in the world. So Gregory de Pippo was one of the individuals that I did reach out to as well, who was able to confirm with me that this translation done by Father Capus, who was also, I would say, impeccable with his Latin. And I read the particular quotes for you. It's very clear. Where does concupiscence come from? It says, because inviolate virginity, while ignorant in concupiscence, supplied the matter of his flesh. Leo also says, Christ took his nature from his mother. The nature that was taken didn't have guilt. I think it's very clear what Leo was saying there. Scholars that have written about Leo have pointed this out. I'm not sure if O'Carroll has done it, but we've got people that are experts on the Immaculate Conception that have definitely pointed this out. So I think it's very clear that Leo does teach this. I think it would be really tough working around this language. I am not an expert in Latin, but I have consulted experts in Latin leading up to this debate for guidance on these issues.
So, and I apologize. I was not starting a timer myself, so I assume we're still in the time.
I have no idea. I have not. Oh, we got a minute.
Yeah, we have 1 minute and 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we got a minute.
So, when he says ignorant of concupiscence, are you denying that means that she didn't have sexual relations with Joseph, or are you saying that it means something entirely different from that?
No, listen to what it says. It's talking about that's part of it. That's part of it. But where does concupiscence come from?
According to Leo, but I would be happy to tell you. In my view, that comes from in a child that comes from their parents having sex. So
okay, so but Leo frequently uses concupiscence in conjunction with original sin. And remember, the one thing that's important, Turretinfan, is what are the sermons what is Leo's tome hearkening to? He's hearkening to the very nativity sermons. So even if the nativity sermons don't use all of the exact language word for word, we have the definitive explanation given to us of what he's talking about here. And Leo frequently uses concupiscence to show us when he's dialoguing with those that deny original sin, to show that is connected directly with it.
All right, that ends this round. Let's go ahead and start 6 minutes. William, you can now.
Give me like 10 seconds, okay?
Yeah, I know you're still getting over that sickness.
I sure am. Just give me a few seconds.
It was pretty rough, so I get it. Y'all, I don't see any questions in the chat if y'all want to go ahead and start posting them. All right, let's start our 6 minutes.
I apologize, Turretinfan. I apologize for that.
You're good.
All right, whenever you're ready. You ready, Turretinfan?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right, begin now.
I want to go back to that Pope John the 22nd and Benedict the 12th. Could you go ahead and were you able to dig up anything more on that? You said that this definitely does exist. On the basis of what do you argue that this is not spurious?
Well, I'm looking at it right now. It's sitting here in front of me. So I have the manuscript sitting in front of me. Not obviously the physical manuscript. I went to the National Library of Paris and found this as the first sermon on the Assumption, which is how it's cited by people who cite it. It's the first sermon on the Assumption. It's on the first page of the manuscript, on the second column, about a third of the way down, and the title.
I'm aware of that.
And the title page of the document says the author's name, and the sermon itself, which is in the original hand, says that it's a papal sermon. The very first line of the first page.
Yes, I'm aware of all of that. The reason I have said that this is not from him, and I'm going to go ahead and ask you a few things. Are you aware that we have Casimir Udinus, who was actually an expert on the works of John the 22nd, who said that this was not from John the 22nd? We don't only have him. We have Father Raymundum and Henry Warthonis, who, when they examined the works, they examined the sermons, they criticized Launoy. They said that this was definitely not legitimate. Have you looked at what they've written on this topic?
I have. I favor this being authentic, not only because that is how it's listed in the library there, and not only because that's what it says on the first page, but I do appreciate that Launoy was humble enough at the time to be uncertain about which pope is referred to.
So if he was uncertain,
with that in mind, the reason I can be more certain than him is because there has been additional scholarship since then, and Noël Valois has published and defended the authenticity of these sermons. There's 32 sermons in the collection.
So, despite was that individual an expert on the works of John the 22nd?
He is. I want to say that he is a medievalist, but I would have to. I I would have to double check all of his other works. This was towards, this was written towards the end of his, lengthy career.
So we've got
not just
somebody,
some blogger, yeah.
So we've got somebody by the name of Casimir Udenis, who was an expert on the works of John the 22nd, who said the complete works of John the 22nd were extant in his Codex 4163. By the way, I'll pass all of this that's been translated for me. I'll pass this on to you. And he said, this is what he said: men of prudent judgment do not place trust in Launoy. He's talking about Launoy. Not only do we have him saying that, but we have Father Raymundum and Henry Warthonis that have examined the works and have said that this is definitely not from either Benedict XII or John the 22nd. So I ask you, on the basis of what expert of this Pope do you claim that this is an actual quotation?
Well, this is from manuscript 4163. It's known by 3 different titles: Latin 3290, which is the preferred number for the French National Library, but there are 2 ancient numbering systems. One was Regius 4163, and the other was Mazarin 1031, which was, Mazarin was the name of a Cardinal Mazarin, I believe. So yeah, it's the same document that is a collection of the extant works. There is one other.
That's correct, but they said it wasn't him. They said it was not his work.
I understand there's also another collection of his manuscripts. As far as I know, the only other copy of manuscripts, which has a different collection, that's in Rome. But I think it's natural that the French collection is going to be the more reliable for a French pope, which is this pope. Whether you think it's
granted, I'm not arguing that it doesn't exist. My argument is that scholars have argued that it is spurious. So I'll ask you this: will you at least concede that it is possible that this is not an authentic work, due to the fact that so many scholars on this pope have said that it is not from any pope?
Well, you just a minute ago told us that they said that 4163 is the works of...
Yes, 4163 contains his works, but they do not believe that this is validly from him. They believe it was from somebody else. They believe this and a few other documents were apocryphal.
Yeah. I don't think that's enough to raise a reasonable suspicion about this.
Despite the fact that they were actual experts on these popes, you still believe that this is legitimate?
I think you'd have to go quite a bit farther to find an actual expert in a pope whose entire body of works can be printed in 300 pages.
Okay. I want to hop on over to Pope Innocent III. Pope Innocent III. What was it exactly that you said that Pope Innocent III was saying?
Okay. What I said that Pope Innocent III was saying was, I believe I quoted from, I'm trying to recall which one I quoted from. There's at least 3 quotations we could bring on this subject.
I think my time has just run out.
Yes, it just
I'll
going off on my end. So
yeah, I'll pick that up in just a bit.
All right, so we have one final round. Each of you get 6 more minutes. So, Turretin, you can now cross-examine William, beginning now.
All right. In the translation that you're referring to for Leo I, where it says that Leo describes Mary as being ignorant of concupiscence and receiving from Jesus, or Jesus receiving from her a nature that didn't have guilt. Is it your contention that this is part of a discussion about Mary, or a part of a discussion about Jesus, or some third option?
It's talking about the mother of the Lord, and it's talking about Christ as well. So remember what it leads up to. Remember, he's talking about, before this, we get to the point where it says all of this, talking about the devil causing humans to lose the gifts of God and to die. And then we eventually get to this point. So he is definitely talking about the mother of the Lord, and he's talking about Christ as well.
Do you have any explanation for why Luigi Gambero doesn't point to this as an example of
There's a
conception?
Yeah, there's a lot that Luigi Gambero doesn't point to when talking about the Immaculate Conception. For instance, he doesn't go very in depth on Gregory of Nazianzus and his teaching there. There's a lot of fathers that he leaves out, a lot of popes that he leaves out as well. So, I mean, I really don't know. He also includes some works that I would say, for instance, that one work which might be pseudonymous. So, I mean, I really don't know why Gambero would have put something one way or another. I mean, I know we do have the works of Juniper Carroll, and we have a whole other load of works that are even more contemporary. We have the work of Father Kappas, who, as you probably know quite well, has put out the latest work in terms of scholarly work on the Immaculate Conception. He just put out this piece of which includes quotes from Leo, just got released on Brill. So we've got much more contemporary stuff. I don't know, maybe Gambero didn't have a lot of this knowledge. I really don't know. The book in and of itself is not, I would argue it's not the greatest compendium on the Fathers and the Immaculate Conception. It is quite good, though.
And the Jurgens collection of the faith of the early fathers on its subject matter.
It's
not going to have anything on any of these gentlemen either, correct?
I'll be honest. I don't own the whole Jurgens set. I'm not entirely certain. I really don't find it relevant, but I mean, I don't know if it would contain that. I haven't read the whole Jurgens set. As far as I know, they're quotes here and there. They're little pieces of quotes, not whole collections of writings. If you do look at what Father Kappas has done, he has actually translated this complete tome. He has provided a more up-to-date translation, and he's done an exegesis of this as well. So I think that is very helpful. And I didn't only consult him as well. Like I said, I did consult other individuals.
And of course, unsurprisingly, Father Kappas himself accepts the idea of the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, correct?
Most definitely. So does Gregory de Pippo.
And when you quoted Pope Gelasius, you mentioned something about him saying, "Grant us the intercession of Mother Mary," or something to those effect. But
that was not to argue for the Immaculate Conception.
Perfect. In terms of Innocent III, I admit that I wasn't paying as much attention as I ought to have been paying, and I couldn't quite catch. It sounded as though you were saying that he started the celebration of some kind of feast. Could you clarify what you had said about that?
Yeah, and the reason I even went there, let me explain. That is my evidence of Innocent III showing that he accepted the Immaculate Conception. The Decreta Ecclesiae Gallicana shows that the festival he instituted in 1215 was by him, and the reading actually reads, by the way, I had it translated for me by somebody that can read the language. It says that the conception of the Blessed Mary is to be celebrated by apostolic mandate. And the reason I asked you what Innocent III wrote was because I previously had said that Innocent III's words that you quoted were not from him. And then a little bit later, a few months later, I said, well, you know what? It's in the Patrologia. It was written by him, but it was probably just mistranslated. Well, I'm going to walk that back. That was not written by Innocent III. I don't believe that was written by Innocent III. I've read a ton of scholars deny that any of these sermons were written by him. And Ming himself wonders in the statements there, in the footnotes, he wonders about this very, very relevant statement, relevant portion that you're quoting from. We've got guys like John Baptist Posa, Father Peter Alva, and the patristic expert Theophilus Reinaldus that say that these weren't from Innocent III. These were not his sermons. So I don't think that's even legitimate. I think that those are spurious.
Okay, so the festival in question was the Festival of the Conception of Mary. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the name of the document establishing that was the
I can't pronounce it very well. Decreta Ecclesiae Gallicanae.
So that sounds like it means the decree of the French Church.
That's correct. It was instituted in France in I just said that. Instituted in France in 1215 by Pope Innocent III.
That's 6 minutes right there. All right, let's go ahead. I think this is the final 6
Yeah,
minutes.
can give me about 30 seconds. I do need to blow my
Yep,
nose.
problem. Sure. If y'all are sending questions in the chat, I'm not seeing them, but we need them now. So go ahead and do it. Okay, I see one by Ben. I'll ask yours for sure. But everybody else, if you're sending them, I'm sorry, I haven't seen them yet. So go ahead and post them again just so that I can be sure to ask them, because we're coming up on closing statements. And so I'd like to have them ready to go here. All right.
All right, gentlemen, I apologize for that.
All right, let's go ahead. Beginning 6 minutes beginning now.
All right, thank you very much for that. Turretinfan, I want to go to exactly what I was talking about before time ran out. On the basis of what do you believe that Innocent III actually wrote these works? Can you quote any scholars that attribute them at this as having been his actual works?
Let me see it. Let me pull up the. I mean, if I recall correctly, as you said, they're included in the Patrology, so that's already.
That's correct.
I mean,
but there's a footnote there by Ming wondering why this sounds so contradictory to other things he's written. And then we've got three experts, John Baptist Posa, Father Peter Oliva, and Theophilus Reinaldus, who all claim that this was not from him, that these were this was plucked from an apocryphal library. So I wonder if there's any scholar that you have that actually can attribute this to having been written by him. Remember, just because it's in the Patrologia doesn't mean that it's not pseudonymous. We have some works of Chrysostom as well that have come out to be spurious in recent times by scholars.
Right. So let me walk that back for a second. I mean, there's a difference between the. I'm not saying that there is some kind of charism of infallibility that possessed by Ming and his fellow editors, such that if they put it in there, then that's it. That's the final word, and it could never be found to be spurious or anything else. But they are, their inclusion, and not under a section of dubious works or pseudonymous works or pseudo Innocent III or anything like that, but putting it in his section as his works is an example of scholarship identifying it as his. And
how is that so? Is there so many others like that?
Hold on a second. Can I just finish?
Go ahead.
It's one thing to say that other scholars disagree and think it shouldn't be included or doubt it or so forth, and even to say that there's a footnote that says that this sermon might not be his, or there's some doubt and so forth. And I appreciate that, and I'm happy to consider that these may be some other medieval scholar if there's indeed evidence of that.
But, wonderful. That's all I wanted to know, if you would consider it. Right. That was my only question. If you viewed it as a possibility.
Oh, okay. Because I thought you were saying you wanted me to identify some scholar.
I did. But it sounds to me like you're unable to. And if you're unable to, I would like for you to at least concede that it's possible that he did not write this.
So inclusion in the Patrology is example of one of the leading group of scholars in Patrology.
How is that, though? I just asked you, though. How is that just inclusion? Yeah. How on earth could that be proof that it is scholarly and it is verifiable if we have works that aren't listed as spurious in the Patrologia that are spurious, Turretinfan? What sense does that make?
Right. It's not absolute proof. It's just an example of
scholars. It's not absolute proof. No, I want to move to Pope Clement the Six. Yeah. The argument you made of Pope Clement the Six. Okay. Do you have that in front of you, the original, the whole context?
I have the sermon one of the Lord's Advent. I have a pretty lengthy paragraph of it.
Do you have the whole thing, the whole work? Do you have it in front of you in Latin?
Hold on a second. I don't know if I don't have it in front of me in Latin. I wonder if I can get it for you quickly or not. I'm not sure.
I'm going to list the papal expert Odinus again, and I'm going to go right back to, I'm sounding like, really, I'm sounding like a broken record now. And I'm going to read something that it's going to sound like I've read this a million times. This text is not from Pope Clement the Six. This text does not exist in any of his sermons. And I'm not, Ray, hold on, I'm not reading. These aren't my words. I'm reading scholars of Pope Clement the Six. This sermon is printed nowhere, nor does Launoy designate an origin of the manuscript. Launoy is not Pythagoras. Can you show us that this is a legitimate writing of Pope Clement the Six? Show us the context of this writing.
Yes. So the citation is the sermon Signa erunt in sole, and the source from which I have a longer quotation than from Launoy is provided by Edward Pusey, and he's quoting from this Jesus College manuscript from which he obtained.
Yes, but that is a secondary source, is it not?
Well, the Jesus College manuscript would be a primary source, and
do you have the primary source in front of you?
No, I don't have the primary source.
You're quoting from Pusey, which is a secondary. I would argue not even secondary. I would argue third hand, because he's quoting from Launoy, who's then quoting from something else. I'm asking if you can provide us first-hand source material for this actual quote of this Pope.
Well, and I'm glad that you asked that question, because I was just clarifying that.
All right, that's 6 minutes right there.
Yeah, we're not relying on Launoy. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now we have 2 7-minute closings. Turretin, you're going to go first, and then William is going to conclude for us. All right, Turretin, are you ready for your 7-minute concluding thoughts now?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, go.
Thanks. We've heard the testimony of 7 or 8 men who are identified as popes who have contradicted the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. And with respect to many of them, we've heard very little as a response. I think what we've seen is that many of these, especially the later ones, had a very high view of Mary, which we should have no doubt about that they did. And even Leo and Gregory, the first 2 big names on the list, had a high view of Mary, but not so high that they would have denied the fact that she was conceived in original sin. And the reason why is pretty straightforward, because their view is that original sin is contracted by anyone who's born by a human father and a human mother. And since they view Jesus as the only exception to that rule, aside from Adam and Eve, obviously, but those aren't people who were conceived at all. But since they view everyone except Jesus as having been produced in this way, they believe that original sin was contracted in this way by Mary, even if they don't come right out and say that in so many words. And nor do they have to. It's understood from their argument. When it comes to the last few popes on the list, we have more explicit statements, such as Innocent III coming out and explicitly telling us that one of the positions is unable to be maintained. Sorry, Innocent V coming out and saying that a degree of sanctification that's one of his hypothetical examples, that it's inappropriate because she wouldn't have contracted original sin. And indeed, when he does finally come to the understanding that he believes, he says that she was sanctified soon after her animation, either on the very day or hour, although not at the same moment. So not at the same moment, meaning that she, for some modicum of time, was unsanctified from the original sin. In other words, she contracted original sin. And that the idea that someone would try to suggest that Innocent V didn't deny the doctrine of original sin as applied to Mary is mind-blowing. With Innocent III, we have some question raised about whether or not all of these works, including the Sermon on the Purification of the Virgin, the Sermon on the Assumption, the Sermon 16 on feast days, which doesn't even come from Lannoy originally, that these are somehow not to be counted. When it comes to Clement the Six, we were told, that just comes from Lannoy. Well, it was identified by Lannoy, who is a Roman Catholic, but even though Lannoy identified this, a Protestant scholar found the original manuscript and provided the context for the quotation that Lannoy provided. So no, it's not. We're not working from a tertiary source here. Although, in fairness, we don't have the Jesus College manuscript in front of us. But I think it would be one thing to just speculate and say, well, there is no such manuscript, and it's another thing to say, essentially, then accusing Pusey of just making it up too. But that just seems to be the standard practice. Is these are all spurious, made-up stuff. But even though we have the manuscript sitting in front of us, the same could be said of the John IV quotation. John IV says that Jesus was the one who's conceived and born without sin, for all other men being born in original sin are known to bear the mark of Adam's transgression. But I suppose we should go to what was identified as the strongest point. The strongest point was identified as Leo's tome, and the fact that Leo uses the term ignorant of concupiscence and saying that he took a nature that didn't have guilt. And of course, the tome is talking about Jesus. Mary is brought up, of course, because she's his mother. But the point is that Mary conceived Jesus in a miraculous way, a way that was not ordinary generation. She conceived without engaging in fornication or even marital relations. And that's what he means when he says that she was ignorant of concupiscence in the production of Jesus. And when it says that the nature that was taken didn't have guilt, in the theology of Leo, that's because he didn't have a human father. We can see that from the works of Leo, which thankfully we haven't been told are spurious. So, and we see the same argument from Gregory. So we can see that in both of these cases, the early fathers' doctrine is that ordinary generation causes original sin to be contracted, and none of these men say that Mary is an exception to that general principle. Even Leo saying that she is pure, an undefiled virgin, and everything else is not saying that she didn't originally have original sin. Keep in mind that the early church had a view that people could be sanctified from sin. And in fact, the medieval popes had a concept that people could be cleansed from original sin. And we even see that as late, as I said, as Innocent V saying that Mary was sanctified, meaning cleansed, in the womb. So what should we take away from this debate? I think the thing to take away is that none of these men were quoted contrary to the quotations that were provided. In other words, none of them said anything that contradicts either the direct statements against the Immaculate Conception or the indirect statements against the Immaculate Conception. And if you want to take a very skeptical view and say that the inclusion in the Patrology is not enough, and that there's some reason to doubt that that some of these works are in fact the author that the Patrology says they are, that's fine. I acknowledge that occasionally corrupt works creep in, but that just means we're going to say it's half a dozen instead of 7 or 8 popes.
All right, that's 7 minutes. All right, William, are you ready for your closing statement?
I sure am.
All right, 7 minutes beginning now.
It was wintertime, and outside the snow ravaged the empty streets. The candlelight flickered back and forth in an almost vibrant fashion. And the great Pius IX reclined in his chair, pen in hand. Ineffable God, ineffabilis Deus, slowly and harmoniously he weaved together. Holy Writ and sacred tradition, as he effortlessly quoted such titans as Blessed Duns Scotus, hearkening to the incredible tradition of the East, and he gave his heart to the fathers and the doctors of the church, who from the very beginning taught Mary was immaculate. He hearkened to the tradition vouchsafed by these popes we speak of today, plenty of them that did believe this. The so-called list of popes that denied the Immaculate Conception comes from a Jansenist. This isn't groundbreaking research done by anyone. It's an argument you hear used from those that don't know better. The list was compiled by Lannoy, who Peroni called an irreligious innovator and an impudent liar. And we saw that he was a liar today. Lannoy was a Socinian. He denied miracles, denied the atonement, and denied the pre-existence of Christ, as well as God's omniscience. His theological leanings are what led to Benedict XIV saying he was a despicable author and a liar. He wrote a work called The Legend of Mary Magdalene and opposed the biblical teaching on marriage. But this aside, his list of the popes is a mockery to the intellect. Quotes out of place, misquotes, quotes that are invented, that don't exist, written by other people, not even the bishops of Rome. It is ever the classical move of a historian to declare, well, it could have been John the 22nd, or maybe it was Benedict the 12th. Who cares anyway, right? Then he provides a quote that we're told from the experts of these writings is not even from a pope. Can you believe that? Ladies and gentlemen, none of these popes denied the Immaculate Conception. If I can point to one comment to the contrary or show they're not even talking about Mary in their discussion, the argument crumbles. None of them denied it. We heard a lot about Leo. There's a ton about what Leo wrote, but then we didn't hear the other stuff that Leo wrote. We had to hear it from me. The Tome of Leo, inviolate virginity knew no concupiscence. It is still referring to original sin. We know she was inviolate because it says so, and I know what it's referring to. I know it's talking about not having had sexual relations. It doesn't change what he says here. When speaking of Christ's assumption of Mary's flesh, talking about how the devil has caused humanity to fall, and then saying the nature from the mother of the Lord had no guilt. That is not changed. That is very clear. Very, very clear. Not to be outdone, the great Leo, followed up by the towering, gargantuan Gregory the Great, who says, and this mountain has been made the highest mountain. Her height has shined out above all the saints. She's raised above all the angels. Perhaps in his most memorable words on Mary, he calls her the mountain of Ephraim. Incredible language. Incredible. Because when he's actually talking about Mary, this is what is said. When he says that all the saints are sinners or born in sin, he then says there's another class. Mary is above all of those saints. No words could better describe Mary than those of Pope John IV, who wasn't just saying Mary was a virgin. Look up the meaning of that Latin word. Fathers have done it. Cardinal Newman has done it. Mary was spotless, pure, immaculate. So Turretinfan can point to one thing, and I say, hey, there's an exception. He says, well, show us, and I show it, and it gets thrown under the rug. In the very works quoted today, in the very words my opponent has quoted from Lannoy, why not read the rest of what is said in context? And that is what John IV said. Just a few sentences later, in context, guess what? Mary is an exception. She's immaculate. And he says that apart from talking about her virginity. Pope Innocent were said, well, it's in the Patrologia. There's a ton of stuff in the Patrologia that has been labeled by the Catholic University of America and tons of other scholarly institutes as being spurious. Pseudonymous as well. Ming had reservations. quotes that made Ming shudder, and experts on his very works say this doesn't exist. Even if we grant he would have said that, before his death, he instituted the conception of Mary. But we don't grant he said those words. We don't grant that. And we don't grant a ton of things that scholars of these popes, actual scholars of them, that read what Lanois said, went to their original manuscripts, pilfered their archives and said, hey, this isn't this guy talking. They gave other names, by the way, that I didn't even list. I didn't have the time. They said, this was written by this guy. We have it over here. He wrote it. This is apocryphal. That says a lot. We read one thing from Innocent where it said, Innocent said she had original sin. Why not read the rest of it? I'll tell you why. The rest of it is not in English. I had it translated by my good friend Ryan Grant, who I thank very much. My friend Father Coppis, Ryan Grant, and Gregory de Pippo, who translated all of these for me, and a ton of other stuff. Because context is very important. And when we do read the context of Innocent V, he says that God forbid that this house would have anything tarnishing it, that the brush of Lazarus would be sought in it. My time is fleeting and it's passing so fast. And I have labored through this debate because I just got better from a flu, losing my voice. And thank you if you've had to struggle listening to my groaning, but I appreciate Turretinfan's time and Michael's time and everybody's time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, William. Okay, let's go ahead and go to some of the chat questions. Y'all go ahead and post the rest, but let me see. We had one from Laura. Let me pull it up here. It's around 9:16. Let's see. All right. Here we go. All right.
Michael, can I make a clarification right away?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I'm looking at the chat box, and Catholic Traditionalist is asking about a Matetics debate. By the way, I'm going to debate Matetics more than once. Our first debate, we're going to dialogue, talk about Vatican II, then we debate the NEMAS. I just want to clarify for him.
Okay, no problem. All right, this one is from Allura. He says, the question is about the reference that you had for Patrologia Latina 79 that you cited earlier. Do you know the column number that you were citing?
Is that for me?
Yes, that one is for you.
Yeah. Let me get to that. I'll tell him right now. Excuse me. Patrologia Latina 79. It says, let me go down. 25 to 31. So there's a bunch of quotes there. I quoted a ton of things from Gregory, so you'll pretty much find everything there.
All right, there's another one.
You can also find it in English. You don't need to look in just the Patrologia. Look at his the volume 13 Selected Epistles book, I think 11 and 12. So it's in English also.
All right. Ben D asks about the Orthodox rejecting the Augustinian concept of original sin, whether or not they do reject it. Depends on really what Orthodox you talk to. Some would say that they would not affirm it. Others, like Callistus Ware, would just say, there's not a really major problem there. Others would affirm it. So really, it's kind of a mixed bag. I don't know if y'all wanted to comment on it, but those are my two.
I think you covered the gist of that. I don't know if Turretinfan wants to comment on that, but I agree with you.
Yeah. I think if you don't affirm the doctrine of original sin, then you can't affirm the dogma of the Immaculate Conception until you affirm the doctrine of original sin. So if you can find an Orthodox person who doesn't consider Augustine a heretic, then maybe, but obviously there's not as much top-down control of doctrine in the Eastern Orthodoxy. You can find all kinds of things. You can even find people that sound Calvinistic there.
I guess this is also from Ben D. I suppose it's for me. I'm not sure. Have you ever studied informal logic? I don't know what informal logic is. I've studied formal. I have formally studied formal logic, but forgive me, I don't know it informal. Maybe I hope it's a typo. If it's not, then I'm really missing out on something here. I need to Google this now. It might
I've
be.
never heard of that.
I don't know about you guys. Yeah, I don't know. I imagine it's formal logic. I'm looking for some other questions here, but I'm not seeing
People
any
got to crawl out of
to
bed and put the show on.
yeah. Yeah, a lot of comments, but just not a whole lot of questions that I can see.
Right.
Last call for questions. Go ahead and put them in right now because we'll go ahead and end it here if we don't get any others. Yeah, not seeing anything else, so we'll probably go ahead and end it there, y'all. All right, well, good debate. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to hopefully more debates on different topics in the future.
Yeah, we have already definitely affirmed that we will do that mega debate on Augustine sometime soon. We'll talk about a date for that soon.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I don't see any other questions. So, well, hold on. Wait, one more.
Okay.
This is from Michael for William. Didn't St. Thomas Aquinas deny the Immaculate Conception?
That's a great question. And if you go back and hear my debate, pretty much everyone I've done in the Immaculate Conception, I have touched upon that. Really, it's tough to fall on either side. We've got guys like Lagrange who say that towards the end of his life, he definitely did affirm it. And then we have some scholars like my very dear friend, Father Kappas, who would say, look, I'm just going to stay neutral because we have some manuscripts that seem to show that he did affirm belief in it before he died. And then we've got some corruptions in those manuscripts. So it's really tough to know either which way. So I'm going to say, I'm not going to fall on the side and say he denied it at the end of his life. I think it's very possible he did affirm it, but either which way, we really don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't see any others, so we'll go ahead and end it there. Again, gentlemen, thank you both for coming on. Always a pleasure, and we'll have more information for y'all pretty soon when it comes to the Augustine debate. I'll see if I can get y'all a
Definitely.
date and post it on the website soon. But again, thank you both for coming on. Everyone, thank you for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe, share this material on your social media. And until next time, God bless you all.
God bless you.